I'm going to bring in my guests. Him and I think Piers may go a little further than I am on this, but I have been brought around, Piers, kicking and screaming, to pay more attention to this issue. How you doing, man? You doing okay today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing fine. I'm joined with Piers Robinson. Piers Robinson is co-director of the Organization for Propaganda Studies. You can follow him on Twitter at Piers Robinson. Piers, where else can people find you, by the way, just so they know?
Well, I'm also the research director for the International Center for 9/11 Justice, and that has a website and a YouTube channel and a Twitter handle. I'm also co-editor of the Journal of 9/11 Studies, which is connected to International Center for 9/11 Justice, which has about 100 odd academic papers on the 9/11 issue. And also, of course, I'm co-editor of Propaganda in Focus, which publishes a wide range of articles on issues related to propaganda. So people can find sort of my work or my editorial work across all of those different formats.
Excellent. I want to show you a clip. In fact, I think I have 3 total. I'm not going to play all of them at once, but I do want to get your take on this. This is one of the, I guess the CIA guy. Listen to what he says here. Tucker makes the point of saying that 2 Al-Qaeda members were being tracked all across the world by the U.S. And in being tracked, they lost track of him in one location, but eventually found him, and he ended up like in California. Listen to this. This is just amazing that all of this was covered up.
Hijackers were moving. On January 8th, 2000, CIA surveillance teams reported that Al-Midhar had boarded a flight to Bangkok, Thailand. He was accompanied by a man they identified as Al-Hazmi. According to the official account, this is where the trail went cold. The CIA placed their names on a watch list and asked that Thai authorities track their movements. 3 months later, the Thai government reported back. Al-Hazmi had boarded a United Airlines flight to Los Angeles. Al-Midhar was with him. The 2 hijackers had arrived in the United States.
But here's my problem with this whole fucking thing and the whole subsequent investigation of 9/11. You have the CIA then following one man and then 2 men all over the planet, and then eventually even to America, right? Landing in Los Angeles, California, and you don't tell the FBI.
Piers, one more clip, 1428. And I want to get your take on this. I know you're further. You go further on this than I do, but that's okay. All of this is problematic, to put it mildly, and all of this was covered up.
CIA had this delusional grand plan. So the CIA, with their information that they had from the Hada House and their own psychological analysis of everybody in that team, they figured the best way is maybe to recruit somebody who came over from Malaysia. Khalil Al-Midhar and now Al-Hazmi. We kept the FBI at bay because we told Mark Rossini and Doug Miller to shut the fuck up. So let's just try to get inside there. And that's what went wrong. That was the grand lie, the grand risk, the grand delusion. You had a duty to protect Americans, and you failed because of your fucking fantastical delusion that you could recruit somebody inside the cell.
The official not.
So he's making the argument, basically, the CIA was trying to recruit various people to get information on Al-Qaeda. And in trying to get this information, they thought, well, if we allow terrorists into the country and we can flip those terrorists, then when those terrorists apparently, ostensibly, I guess, go back, then we would have a mole into the organization itself. And apparently, he's arguing that this was a royal F-up, that they didn't alert the FBI, they alerted the FBI at the last minute, up until the point where it was too late to effectively do anything, in which case we get hit because CIA F's it up. And then immediately after, went into a grand scheme of covering all of this up. Give me your take on that.
Well, that's certainly his interpretation of events. And of course, he dominated in the first episode of Tucker Carlson's series on 9/11. And in a way, I mean, we've known for quite some time that the CIA had contact with the alleged hijackers. We know the Able Danger operation, which Tony Schaefer was involved in, that the CIA were tracking all of the alleged hijackers. There were various blocks within the FBI from being able to arrest them. For example, Colleen Rowley was an early whistleblower from the FBI who explained that she was trying to actually apprehend two of the alleged hijackers, but she was prevented from doing so. And so what that picture essentially paints is this knowledge, this CIA intelligence knowledge of the alleged hijackers. The interpretation in that first documentary is that, as you say, this was a catastrophic cock-up by the CIA, so to speak.
Yes.
I mean, my interpretation of this in tandem with all of the other evidence that we have in relation to 9/11 is that there's something more nefarious going on. That the CIA was involved, and there's a lot of material on this in public domain. For example, the hijackers getting given visas to get into the US from a Saudi station, and that was being sort of green lighted into the US. The Prince Bandar, the Saudi official, being involved with contacts with the alleged hijackers, and of course Prince Bandar was very close to the Bush administration, and so there is this network backdrop to what we know about 9/11, about these alleged hijackers and their connections with Saudi Arabia and their connections with the CIA. I think actually Kit Clarenberg published in Grayzone a couple of years ago the latest information about the connection between the CIA and two of the alleged hijackers. And so, yes, what you have there is all, I think, all the indicators, as I'm suggesting, of an operation which the intelligence services were fully aware of what was going on. And it can be, and I know Tucker Carlson has been careful at how he pitches his series. Some interpret this as a cock-up, but others interpreters, no, this was deliberate and intentional. And in a broad sense, I guess that episode fits into this theory or this argument out there that this was a let it happen event, that it was a managed war trigger, that there was awareness that this attack was going to come, and it was used and then exploited in order to get the global war on terror going, of course. But let it happen, the other, and we'll get to that in a minute, I guess, the other major theory there is that it's not just a case of letting it happen. It's actually, this has been instigated by essentially deep state actors, not just in the West, but also in other countries, as part of essentially a black operation, a covert operation designed to help mobilize the American public to go to war in the context of global war on terror. But certainly all of the evidence that I think that Tucker Carlson puts up in the first episode is certainly, for those who want to go with the limited let it happen theory, it provides some fairly solid sort of evidence in support of that analysis.
Well, the third episode goes. You can look at the third episode and come to the conclusion that they let it happen, and what I mean by that is this. So Tucker in the third episode points out all of the situations, like meaning all of these warning signs. Like we found people taking air flights. We found, meaning they were getting just warning signs, and the Bush administration was like, yeah, that's okay. Effectively blowing off all of the warnings that were effectively going on. And I gotta be, again, I didn't realize how significant this is. I knew about the last one where they went to the Bush administration, was like, hey, we're getting signs about Al-Qaeda. And it was like, don't tell me about Al-Qaeda anymore. I don't want to hear anything about it. Listen to this though.
Of an impending attack in the United States came in the summer of 2001, just months or weeks before. On April 20th, 2001, a briefing to top Bush administration officials noted that bin Laden planned multiple operations. In May 2001, a report was distributed to Bush administration officials noting that bin Laden public profile may presage attack. On May 16th, 2001, an intel report mentioned a phone call to an embassy that bin Laden's supporters were planning an attack inside the United States. On June 12th, a CIA report indicated that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was recruiting people to travel to the U.S., possibly to aid in terror attacks. On June 22nd of that year, the CIA notified station chiefs about intelligence suggesting an al-Qaeda suicide bombing in the United States could be on the way. At about the same time, U.S. intelligence issued a terror advisory threat indicating a high probability of near-term spectacular terrorist attacks resulting in numerous casualties. On June 25th, George W. Bush's counterterrorism czar Richard Clarke told Condoleezza Rice that 6 intelligence reports showed al-Qaeda personnel warning of an impending terror attack. 3 days later, he told Rice that something very, 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 very big was about to happen.
This is amazing. like when you think about it, it's like, okay, so you guys were getting all of these indications and nobody did anything about it, which goes to the idea of, again, it seems like somebody let it happen. And, I think Tucker pointed out people were betting against airlines and they hid the people who were betting against those airlines, meaning somebody knew something was going to take place and they didn't seem to move on this in any real tangible way. How do you, give me your thoughts on this. Is it, because I think, let me ask you this.
The
please.
Third episode is sorry. Okay. The third episode does do a reasonably good job of showing all of the occasions where the opportunity, so to speak, to take out Al-Qaeda was simply turned down. And this is going on during the Clinton administration. And then it goes into this period in the run up to 9/11. You have these warnings simply being ignored. And, as this is very clear evidence that there was knowledge that this was going to happen. The put options, the informed trading reference you just made, yes, this has been known for a long time that there were people who were placing bets on shares, American Airlines and United Airlines going down at the point of 9/11. The 9/11 Commission even noted that it identified one of the individuals responsible for those trades, but because they had no possible connection of Al-Qaeda, they didn't pursue it any further, which of course is an absurd response to that. You'd want to investigate that person.
Wow.
And how it was that they knew that this attack was going to occur. So you've got that very solid evidence with foreknowledge that they knew that these attacks were going to occur, coupled with all of these sort of, as it were, blatant disregard of these warnings which were coming up through the system. This was something which they wanted to happen. And for sure, the third episode does a very good job of that. I think that, all of this obviously fits into this kind of notion of, okay, it could be a CIA operation which has gone wrong, it's gone out of control, and then they just let it happen, and so on. But it's still very much something which is being organized external to the US. And I think, as people will see when they get to Tucker Carlson's 4th episode, when he talks about World Trade Center 7, which you've mentioned, that's where I think, is a very useful place for people to sort of start in a way, in order to try and understand the totality of the 9/11 event. Because as soon as you sort of start looking at the issues surrounding World Trade Center 7, there's not just a foreknowledge issue going on here. What you have is, of course, you have the third building in New York on that day, which collapsed 5 hours after the towers came down, and it wasn't hit by an aeroplane. And of course, as has been researched exhaustively for many years now, and the University of Alaska at Fairbanks is the latest big study on it. This
Piers,
building
I hate
collapses.
to interrupt you. I'm sorry to interrupt. Sorry. Is there any way you can get closer to the mic? They're saying that the audio is dodgy.
Yeah, sure. How's that? Is that audio better?
Much better. Thank you.
Much better. Right. Okay. I'll try and stay this close to the mic. So the issue with the World Trade Center 7 and the free fall collapse. What free fall means is that the building's coming down for the first 2.5 seconds at free fall speed, as though there's no resistance beneath, as a ball would drop if you drop the ball. And of course, building to fall at free fall speed, it means that all of the underlying structure has to give way at the same time. There has been no resistance to the building. And of course, that's in a sense, this is a smoking gun, that this is a controlled demolition, that the building has been deliberately brought down through explosives or through whatever mechanism. And that's why it goes into free fall, and also falls symmetrically as well into its own footprint. Yeah. And so, of course, as soon as one starts to understand the physics surrounding this, I remember having a conversation with a friend who's an architect who was saying, well, yeah, obviously they brought this building down, but they brought the building down because it was unstable and so on, and it was a danger. And I pointed out to this architect, well, but how did they wire the building within 5 hours? And he couldn't understand. He couldn't continue the conversation, because obviously, if Building 7 is controlled demolition, this must be something which is planned in advance. So all of that points towards this is not just a let it happen, letting an Al-Qaeda operation carry through the attacks on Twin Towers. This is something which has been organized much closer to home, because unless you run with a rather fantastical theory that Al-Qaeda had access into World Trade Center 7 and were wiring it with explosives, which no one plausibly thinks that's the case, this points towards, again, a black operation, a covert deep state operation. And that building was brought down. And it is a good place to start, because the physics is not particularly complex for people who aren't versed in physics or the hard sciences. And they can understand how structurally this building, the only way for it to suddenly drop in that way is if all the support's removed, and if all the support columns are removed at the same time, and that means something very deliberate is being done to bring the building down. But as soon as you realize that mentally, then the door opens to understanding this is an instigated, a manufactured war trigger involving deep state actors. It's a difficult bump to get over, and I fully understand that. And it's a bump which I didn't get over for a very, very long time. I was an academic working in the field of international politics, and I wasn't going anywhere close to this issue and so on. But when you realize essentially the facts of the case, whether it's the World Trade Center 7 or the backdrop, CIA knowledge, contact with the alleged hijackers, once you put all those things together, factually, that this is probably what happened. And then it's this kind of, well, how on earth would they dare do something so horrendous? And of course, then you realize, well, okay, we know, and this isn't really controversial anymore, we know that 9/11 was the trigger for the global war on terror and multiple regime change. Noam Chomsky doesn't dispute that. That's well established. Mm-hmm. This wasn't just one war they had to mobilize the public for. This was multiple wars in the international system, and wars which haven't stopped, of course, because Iran was on that list of countries that they were planning to hit in the 90s and through into the immediate post 9/11 era. So you need huge conflicts in the international system. So you need a major false flag in order to do that. And then this other kind of psychological bump is, how would even people within our deep state dare to do that? Well, we have been here before. We know most people, well, a lot of people now understand what happened with the JFK assassination. That this was the CIA was involved in the assassination of a popular US president in broad daylight, sitting next to his wife in a horrific, ambush essentially. And so, we have a deep state which is capable of some pretty nefarious acts. And so I think, you get to this bump which you get over, and you recognize that, you realize that this has happened before, you realize that the facts of the matter point directly towards, essentially an instigated false flag. And then you deal with it, and then you move on. It's difficult and it's big, but look at the world we're living in. Look at what Israel's doing to the Palestinians. This is a genocide that's going on. I saw that you're interviewing Kit about Charlie Kirk, and of course, I'm not following that closely, but there's a huge amount of controversy over exactly what is going on in relation to that. We are living in an era with the kind of this moment of Western edge of decline for the empire. We're living in an era of tremendous deception and political flux and extreme actions as well. So I think, bringing that into bear on the analysis, in a way, 9/11 becomes much less surprising to understand it as, in a sense, our worst fears, that this was something, these were people from within our own political system who were involved in doing this, not this bin Laden out in a cave in Afghanistan and so on. But, and it becomes, unpleasantly but realistic to understand that that's what happened and so on.
Yeah, Building 7 is hard to get around. Like, if nothing else,
it is.
When I saw Building 7, I was like, nothing hit that building. How did that building collapse? And then, of course, you get engineers coming saying, well, the way this building collapsed was because shrapnel hit it, and there was low burning fires. And when the low burning fires hit it, it's like, okay, dude, just stop. Like, even if that's true, I don't believe that, right?
There's plenty of people out there offering these theories which try to explain the official narrative. It's interesting that when one has sort of dealt with Building 7 and one moves to, for example, the Twin Towers, or WTC 1 and 2, and their collapse, it was an American scientist, Bazant, who wrote the explanation for the collapse of those buildings, and the mathematical calculations were done and completed and submitted to a journal effectively within 2 days of 9/11 occurring. And that was presented as the official explanation for why the towers, having received damage from the aircraft impacts, then collapsed entirely. And his theory has been, discredited since then, but it was very rapidly put out into the public domain. Mm-hmm. But the issues of the Twin Towers are not that different from the World Trade Center 7, in the sense that what one has to think about is just the physics of what one is observing when the towers come down. You're talking about the top section of the tower starts to descend, and then it carries on at constant acceleration, 2/3 acceleration due to gravity, all the way down to the bottom. So that tiny section of the top building is destroying an entirely intact building beneath. This is a violation of Newtonian physics. This is not possible unless there is actual action being taken to remove the floors below to create this collapse of the building. So other just to be clear, simple physical things that you see with the tower collapses, you see that the building is going outwards, exploding outwards, and then the gravitational collapse, it would be straight down. It wouldn't be billowing out to either side. And then, of course, when one then takes the time to sort of look a little bit more carefully at the footage, one can start to see that there are explosive blasts which go off far below the collapse line, even really quite close to the base of the building as the building starts to come down. And the obvious explanation for that is these are explosives which are going off early, and the blasts are going off, and you can see them visibly coming out the sides of the building. Of course, when we all saw it at the time, we're shocked and we're horrified, and we believe what we're told. The official narrative: the planes hit, buildings weakened, and then they collapsed, and so on. And of course, we believe that, or a lot of us believe that. But when you take a calm, sober, objective look at the buildings, and there's a great video by David Chandler, which is on the web, where he talks you through. He's a physicist. He talks you through what you're seeing as the building comes down. You have this, as I had at the time when it was explained to me what I was, how the buildings were coming down, was this sinking feeling of, yeah, okay, we're not being told the truth about these buildings. This building is not simply collapsing because this tiny section at the top is powering through the rest of the building. It is being explosively destroyed. And again, the implications of that take to a place which is recognizing that, yeah, this is an epic, a huge, but at the end of the day, something which is a familiar, in a sense, military tactic: false flags. Yeah. Carry out false flag attacks, self-inflicted wounds, in order to get the population's blood boiling sufficiently to be able to go to war. And I think that's the bottom line.
So how do you view this? You view this as two things are happening at once, or three things. One, the CIA allows people into the country knowing full well what they plan and intend to do. Two, there are explosives that are also rigged to the building. So when the planes hit, the explosives will go off to allow this kind of pancaking effect and basically bring down the towers. And three, somebody fucked up on building 3 or building 7, that they believed or assumed that the building would also get hit. The building didn't get hit, and somebody pulled the trigger in order to bring that building down also. Is that the thought process that you're going with?
I think that the alleged hijackers is a backstory that was created in order to create a plausible narrative blaming Al Qaeda. We don't have time to get into the issues surrounding the aviation side, but it's considered very unlikely that the alleged hijackers would have had the ability to fly the aircraft in the way that they were flown. So you had limited flying experience. There's a whole host of questions around, whether they were actually on the planes, and the lack of confirmed or signed off inventories and so on for passengers. So I think there is a constructed story there with alleged hijackers, and this is an area that the International Centre for 9/11 Justice we're looking at. We're looking at the question of the flights and how these planes came to be flown and the way that they were flown and so on. So I think that's very much sort of a narrative which was constructed. The bottom line, the buildings were wired to be brought down. The cover was effectively, the planes, the alleged hijacking, hijackers point the finger at Al Qaeda to sort of construct that part of the narrative. I think Building 7 is an interesting question because some people theorize that perhaps it was meant to come down when two towers came down and something went wrong. So they then were left with a standing building, which they wanted to come down. Others have argued that possibly another plane, the fourth plane, which crashed in Pennsylvania, possibly was going to be used to fly into WTC-7. But we don't know for sure. We don't know exactly what was going on. I mean, it is possible that they were expecting to bring that building down as the towers came down, and in the dust which enveloped the whole area, not too many questions would be asked about it. We don't know. All we do know in terms of WTC-7 is that and also the towers, that they had to have been brought down in a deliberate, controlled way through using demolition techniques.
And then, of course, immediately after that, cover up, ramp up to war, do everything in their power to block the 9/11 Commission report, which wasn't a report at all in real terms.
They covered up the 9/11 Commission, and you're right. This is an important point, and this is picking up what I said before. They went straight to war on the day of 9/11. They were identifying multiple countries, that, as Wesley Clark revealed the list, didn't he, several years later, about the list that he'd seen in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. But other officials have said that those lists were in place prior to 9/11. But America was immediately onto a war footing. Afghanistan, then Iraq, and of course, all of those conflicts segued ultimately into what we saw in Libya, what we saw in Syria, and take us up to where we are today, which is still, Iran was always the last country on that list of countries which were discussed for regime change prior to 9/11. And of course, Iran is still in the crosshairs.
What's amazing to me is, I guess people were pissed off. They were bewildered. There was no question about, well, obviously we have to go kill a lot of people because the towers fell. And this project for a new American century became manifest. In which case, as you point out, the goal, in fact, John Kiriakou was on my show. John Kiriakou pointed out that Dick Cheney, in one of the meetings, pointing out that they wanted to be in Iran within 6-7 months and got bogged down in Iraq. And so I understand the point behind this. Like, because some people can say, well, dude, this was 20 years ago. But our current world is effectively set in what happened on 9/11. And, whether they were demolition, whether it was these people were just radically, bizarrely incompetent, whatever that answer is, both of those answers are problematic. It's kind of like when people talk about UFOs. It's like, it's either us or it's not us. Both of those answers are mind-blowing. And it's kind of the same with this. Whether you go with the Tucker Carlson's point of view that this was a calamitous F-up, and then they try to hide it after they F'd it up, and there's been no accountability for it, and there's been no real investigation into it. Or whether they take your point of view of, well, they obviously planned this. These buildings were obviously taken down, all for the entire point of what they ended up doing anyway, which was effectively creating a pretext to go into Iraq. Both of those things are problematic. Both of those things are heavy.
As you say, whichever way you come at this, and wherever you are in terms of understanding what is going on, and I think Tucker Carlson's series is good, as much as some people criticize it for not going far enough. It is making this point very clearly that all of this matters, and so on, wherever you stand on the issues that we've been talking about. And it is absolutely relevant to where we are today, because it has taken us, through Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and of course, and again, emphasize the point, Iran, there's going to be a starting up again of direct action to overthrow the Iranian government. So all of these wars, which were essentially instigated at the point of 9/11, are highly relevant and still real to the world that we're in today. And we still are on the precipice in a way of global conflict. Russia, obviously, but also Iran. If there is a serious attempt on Iran, who knows where that's going to play out? And in the context of a genocide against Palestinians. So we really are in a period where understanding how we got to where we are now, and in a sense making political decisions about what side we're on and so on. We have to understand how we got here, and I think understanding the events surrounding 9/11 and whatever combination of foul play or incompetence you want to go with, but understanding that is critical to inform how we deal with where we are now. And I guess the warning in all of this is that we know a lot now about what happened on 9/11. So we are talking about people who are belligerent in the extreme. We're now in the situation we're in now, where the belligerence is still there. These forces behind 9/11 are still there today, pushing us towards war, whether it's with Russia or with Iran. So this is more relevant than ever. It's not just a historical event to understand.
Do we know who were making bets on the airplanes? They were hiding that in the 9/11 report. Like, they didn't want to disclose that. But do we know who those people were, or those organizations?
The 9/11 Commission knows who those individuals are, and said that it wasn't worthy of any further investigation because these individuals could not possibly be connected with Al Qaeda. Which just begs the question, well, okay, but they still know the attacks are about to happen, and if they're not connected with Al Qaeda, maybe Al Qaeda is not responsible for the attacks. So, this will be one of the things which, obviously, Tucker Carlson's series is supposed to be there to try and make the case for a new investigation. And, the International Center for 9/11 Justice, we with a number of other organizations, had a big event in Washington, D.C. Around the anniversary. And we had Senator Ron Johnson there, for example. Former Representative Kurt Weldon was there. Dennis Kucinich was there. And the general sort of drive is that there needs to be some form of new investigation into 9/11, and making the case that that's where we need to go. And one of the things for sure is to look into the informed trading, the put options in the run-up.
Yes.
Who knew? As well as a multitude of other issues which that they have sought to bury and obfuscate. And again, you talked about the 9/11 Commission. I think Tucker's second episode does do a reasonably good job of showing to the American public and the global public how fraudulent the 9/11 Commission report was. It was Philip Zelikow who was the guy who was really kept control over the writing of that report. And this is a chap who was connected to the Bush administration. He was not independent. He had conflicts of interest. And if you read the 9/11 Commission reports, as somebody who's familiar with the construction of public myths, which as a historian, Philip Zelikow certainly is, you have a report which doesn't really read like a rigorous sort of scientific analysis of a report. It reads like narrative construction, and it's all pointed towards painting this picture of this Al Qaeda network and so on, connection with the rogue states and so on. So it was narrative construction that the 9/11 Commission was mainly about, with Zelikow at the head of it. But that's not a proper investigation. That's not getting to the truth of what happened on 9/11.
And to make it even worse, then you get one president after the next. Meaning, take up the 9/11 part out for a moment. Everybody understood that George Bush led the country into a war. That immediately after this, Bush was like, we need to connect this to Saddam Hussein. Figure out a way to do it. Like, almost instantly. No, there was no forethought. There was anything. There was no analysis. We need to connect this to Saddam Hussein. And effectively crafting this in any way he wanted to craft it to come up with a justification for war. Obama gets in office. Nancy Pelosi, who knows at this point. Nancy Pelosi is giving interviews where she said, I knew he was lying. And when you bring up this notion of impeachment, he's like, yeah, we thought it'd be a distraction. They impeached Trump twice. It's like, yeah, we think that'll be a distraction. The fact that the president lied the country into a war where a million Iraqis, if not more, were killed, create the pretext for us to go into multiple countries with Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, etc., spending $10 trillion to do it. And the political space was like, yeah, we don't want to touch this. Do you think that at some point this will get touched, that this will get relitigated, reinvestigated, or do you think we're pissing in the wind on this?
I certainly don't think that we're pissing in the wind on this. I think there are two ways I respond to this question when it's given to me. Is that, you know, it might be that we don't get the kind of accountability that we ideally would have, where we have people who are prosecuted and so on. You know, Tony Blair's put on a war crimes trial, etc. Now, I think we should aim for that, and I do think that we're in a state of political change at the moment and flux, where actually there is an opportunity that, you know, if enough people realize how corrupt, as it were, the system has been, that the uniparty, as you were implying just then, that you know, maybe there will be ultimately the political will, as we try to have some kind of reorganization of our political structures for proper formal accountability and so on. So I think that's what we should be pushing for, and that's what we should be aiming for. But even if we fall short of achieving that, what I do think, and what I am very confident of, is that, you know, and we're already seeing these changes in the last couple of years. More and more people are waking up to the issues surrounding 9/11, just as more and more people have woken up to the issues surrounding the JFK assassination. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I think that sort of we will reach a point where most people, and globally, I'm sure the public opinion polls show a much higher proportion of the public are aware that 9/11 was a false flag,
inside job,
etc. But within the West, I think you will find that increasingly people will be adding together JFK, 9/11, and all these smaller level things like the Syria chemical weapons or the Iraq case, the WMD. This is building up a stock of knowledge in the mind of a lot of people in the West, and they realize that, yeah, you know, our government's been lying, and they've been lying on very major issues, especially when it comes to these wars, which we've been dragged into time and time again. And so I think we'll reach that point where most people will know and understand, and we won't have a false historical memory where everyone just believes the official story on 9/11. And I think we'll get there, and there are signs we are getting there. And in a way, Tucker Carlson's series is an indicator of that opening up. However limited and however carefully he is treading into these controversial areas, you know, he's a very influential broadcaster, obviously, and certainly the International Center for 9/11 Justice. I mean, our feeling is, you know, Jimmy Dore, for example, Jimmy Dore has been talking about these issues for a long time now. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it is opening up, it is widening, and, you know, in the academic sort of realm, I mean, I know a lot of colleagues now, both in and out of the system, who know full well what happened on 9/11. So I think we'll get there.
I mean,
ideally, it would end in a full inquiry, you know, criminal convictions and so on. But if we don't get to that point, we will at least have most people knowing what really happened, and that will matter at the end of the day. It will matter because it will inform how people react to their governments. It will mean that people are less likely to be fooled again, and so on. Again, you know, they might be considering various sort of techniques to get us to war with Russia. I think the European Union's going with the drone allegations of the Russian Federation, that the Russians are flying all these drones around Europe and so on. You know, publics, I think, you know, are not going to fall for these things in a way that they have done in the past, and that's because more people are waking up to these issues, these structural deep events, as I called them in a paper I wrote with Kevin Ryan a year or so ago.
I mean, this destroys the government, right? I mean, it has to. I mean, what I mean by that is kind of like, and I think that's part of the hurdle that I think people have with this. It's again, I'm going to use UFO reference. If you ask people, do they believe in UFOs or those type of things? Many people will say yes. They believe that there's something else out there. But for people who are in the field, there's always this gap between, I think of this, but I don't think of this like a value of $1. Like the value of $1, there's, even though it's subjective, you feel it. There's a weight to it. It's almost like you understand it, almost like lungs to air. This is kind of very similar in this way, where to believe that a government will go this far, murder 4,000 of its people, in pursuit of murdering millions others, that's a big pill. Oh, that's a horse pill. And not just a horse pill, any notion of credibility from the government from that point on. Because it's not just the people who did it, it's the people who covered it up also, meaning the next administration and the administration after that. And I guess the further you get away from it in regards to the administration, they have less culpability. But the Obama administration, they are entirely culpable, meaning they just wanted to sweep this under the rug and move on. They didn't care about the reality of this, the complications of this, any kind of difficulties associated with punishment of the commander-in-chief that was at the helm when all of this was taking place. It destroys all credibility in the political system going forward. I mean, I know you say like it makes people doubtful of any of the tricks that the government is doing. It makes people doubtful, period. Not about tricks. Meaning the government could come after that and be completely honest, and nobody will believe anything that the government was saying. I'll give you another example. Richard Dolan. Richard Dolan did this interview once where he came out, he says, even if the government came out and says, we're coming clean on this topic, whatever the topic is, how many people will believe the government when it says it? And again, this goes to the JFK thing, the weapons of mass destruction stuff. There is a level of skepticism that is built into the way that we look at our government these days that wasn't there in the 70s, wasn't there in the 80s. I don't even know if it was there in the 90s, but it's there now. And I think the polling that you point out is showing that more and more people are considering maybe the government did do it. It's indicative of that. I don't know how government keeps together under that level of skepticism about anything that the government does.
I think you're right. One of the implications, and this is what I felt at the time, when I realized that there was a big issue with 9/11, I was already a critical scholar, and I was, teaching Herman Chomsky's propaganda model, and I knew that the system was not functioning correctly, no doubt about it, and we had to try and sort of correct the media and how it was operating. When the facts sunk in regarding 9/11, it was just a recognition. Okay, we're not just talking about a dysfunctional system. We're talking about a system which is broken. That our democracy, or what we perceive to be our democratic system, is simply not functioning in any way. It is broken, and the implications of that are intimidating, because you realize, well, actually, this is going to have to be changed, and this is going to be a really big task to change a system which is this broken, where these things can be occurring, such as 9/11 or the assassination of Kennedy, or possibly with Kirk as well, Charlie Kirk, who just had. And that is a demand upon us as citizens, that actually we can't just turn a blind eye, that we have to confront the reality that we need to engage in probably generational political change. It doesn't have to be sort of, I'm not talking about violent revolution. I'm talking about people, recognizing the system's broken and then taking the steps, however that might form in the coming years, whether it's through new political movements or parties. We don't know how it will evolve. But it will require energy and effort from populations in the West to deal with our political class, who, as you say, varying degrees of culpability. The further away from 9/11, the less, and so on. But I think people recognize that there's a level of corruption in our political establishments across Europe and America, which is severe. Whether you look at the Epstein business and the trafficking issues surrounding that, or we look at the wars and the lies, whether you look at Russiagate, the system is very broken and it's very corrupted, and we have to, and it's going to have to be us, the people, who push the politicians to do it, because people who get into those positions of power, they are to varying degrees co-opted or corrupted. I think that's certainly my experience of my interaction with politicians over the years. And they're going to need to be pushed by popular will, by people, activism. At the moment, this danger of war with Russia, that can be blocked if enough people get streets and protest, and that will have an effect and so on. But it requires people to get busy and so on. So this is a huge effort, a huge task we have ahead of us. But that's the bottom line. If these things are going on, it does mean the system's broken, and it does mean that we've got a lot of changes which we're going to have to push through one way or another, unless we're just going to give up entirely and just allow these things to keep on happening, which of course I don't think is an alternative. You said that how could it be that a deep state would harm America's own civilians? But politicians, the Tony Blairs and the George Bushes, when they make decisions to go to war in Iraq, they know full well that several thousand young American women and men and women will die. They're going to die, as well as all the civilians. They're making those kind of calculations all the time. They probably see it as sacrifice. They probably see a sacrifice of American lives for the pursuit of American interests, and also some of that also includes false flags as well. These are sacrifices necessary for whatever vision they have. So it's a big problem we've got, and I think you're right. That's why people don't want to go there, because it is, in a sense, not quite the sum of all fears. But Frances Shaw, who works with us at IC91, she's a psychologist, and she wrote a very good podcast about how coming to terms with these kind of deep state crimes, or state crimes against democracy, as Lawrence Verhaven described them, it's very similar to when you have child abuse within a family. Okay. And what tends to happen when you have a child abuse going on in the family is that the siblings and one of the parents, normally the mother, simply block it out, and they don't want to acknowledge that this is going on. So it's basically sort of pushed out to the margins. And Francis argues that it's a very similar relationship between populations and the government as it is between children and the father in a family. The father is there to protect the family. The state is there supposedly to protect us. And realizing that actually maybe it's not. Maybe it's actually harming us very directly is a really difficult thing to get over, psychological bump. But people in abusive families do get over that bump and are able to realize what's going on and come to terms and then deal with the abuse which is occurring. And it's the same with understanding these kind of crimes. This is recognizing that what we thought was there to look after us might not be looking after us.
Piers, fantastic breakdown, man. Thank you for this. And if nothing else, I mean, if Tucker can get somebody like me to pay attention to it, then I would imagine there are going to be a lot of people who are paying attention to it. They're going to come to different assessments and watching those series. I mean, I think he's on number 3. I watched the 3rd one today, and the 4th one, I guess, is going to come on next week. Thank you for this. Deeply appreciate it.
It's good to talk to you. Sorry?
Oh, I was asking, it's 5 total. He has 2 more left.
Yeah, he has two more. There's 5 in total. And, Journal of 9/11 Studies, we've got a lot of articles, I mean, they're more academically inclined, but on the 9/11 issue, there's a lot of material out there on the web, which people can go to in order to understand better, the arguments and the debates over what really happened on 9/11.
I'll put it below the video. If you send me the link to it, I'll put it below the video so people can read it for themselves, just to get a wider context on the conversations that's taking place around it. Because I gotta be honest, this is illuminating, and not necessarily in the best way. It's kind of like a black light. It's very dark. Piers Robinson, thank you for this. Piers Robinson, he's co-director of Organization for Propaganda Studies. You can follow him on Twitter at Piers Robinson, and the other organizations that you're associated with, I need to write those down. Please give the audience a heads up where they are.
Yeah, International Center for 9/11 Justice, IC911.org on Twitter, and also obviously with its own website, and the Journal of 9/11 Studies, which is linked to IC911, that's on that website as well. So that's a good place to go for all things related to 9/11.
I'll put it below the video. Piers, you have a fantastic rest of your day, man. Thank you for this.
Okay, good to talk with you.
Bye-bye. All right, that is a good